Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. In just a moment, you'll hear from my colleague, recruiting insider Tyler Calvaruso. We got a lot to break down this week as Penn State adds to its recruiting class on Monday night, prepares to host a bunch of prospects on campus this weekend, and is really still fresh off of hosting several key targets this past weekend. We will sort through what you need to know about Penn State's 2026 recruiting class and a lot more right here on this episode. Commitment number 20 is officially on board in the form of Elijah Littlejohn, a linebacker in the top 24/7 rankings out of North Carolina. Tyler will come on in just a moment to help break down that pickup, what it means for the linebacker class, and what Penn State sees in this particular prospect. We'll also go through 7 different names of prospects you need to know who were on campus this past weekend for official visits. Where do Penn State help themselves? Where are they maybe pushing towards a commitment? Where do they still have some ground to make up? Additionally, we have some fresh Penn State camp observations. We got to look at a future Nittany Lions quarterback, a couple other young passers who are on campus, an offensive lineman who continues to stand out from within this 2026 class for the Nittany Lions as well. And so we'll dive into a lot right here in the Lions247 Podcast. Without further ado, let's bring in Tyler Calvaruso. We spent some time together this past Friday over at Penn State practice facilities watching the Big Man Challenge, watching the latest 7-on-7 tournament. Hopefully you checked out our coverage on Friday and throughout the weekend. We've got highlight videos up of some particular prospects. We've got some camp notebooks up as well. And naturally, when you got a bunch of official visitors in town, we've had a lot of content coming out of those experiences at lions247.com. So, Tyler, I know you're doing a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of hard work through the month of June. We're past the midway point of this month. And once again, we've got a lot to catch up on with you here on the podcast.
Yeah, a lot to dive into, man, between the camps, the OVs, Lash Bash. It's hectic, but what do I always say? It's the way I like it. It's the best time of the year.
That's right. And Lash Bash is usually a staple of the July recruiting calendar here in Happy Valley. The recruiting calendar across college football has changed significantly this summer. And so you're actually going to see the Lash Bash taking place this upcoming weekend. That's something we'll get into a little bit later in the week with our second episode. That's a really important event on the offseason calendar every year for Penn State and top recruits. But Tyler, when there is a commitment to discuss, that's going to supersede everything else. And that's what we've got on our hands today as we record on Tuesday morning. And on Monday evening, it was Elijah Littlejohn out of North Carolina, a top 24/7 prospect. We've got him listed as an edge rusher over at 24/7 Sports, but he's going to play linebacker here in Happy Valley. Before we get into the details of who he is as a player and what he brings to the Happy Valley, let's go through his recruiting path and why it ultimately led here to State College.
I mean, to be completely honest, he's probably a linebacker we should have been talking about more throughout official visit season and throughout the spring. I mean, we put so much of our focus on Kosiak Paula from Texas, Rodney Colton from Georgia, and Littlejohn was kind of flying under the radar from our end, but he really shouldn't have been considering he kind of skyrocketed up the board for Dan Connor throughout the spring. He tested really well at Under Armour Charlotte, and that kind of opened some eyes, raised some alarms. Penn State got him out to campus for a visit in the middle of the spring, in the middle of April. It was April 17th he visited. Less than a week later, he has an official visit locked in. Wasn't quite sure if that official was going to take place as originally scheduled, just because in the weeks leading up, there wasn't much buzz surrounding Littlejohn. It was more Akpala, Colton, where things going to go with those guys. But Littlejohn was maintaining a prominent place on that board. The official visit did indeed take place during that June 6th through the 8th weekend, and Penn State nets its second commitment from that weekend. Amori Polidor, the corner from Baltimore, being the first. Littlejohn follows him into the class, and I think it's a really high-quality get. I think there's a lot to like here. If Littlejohn was just a little bit taller, we're probably talking about a high-quality edge rusher at the next level. He brings a different kind of skill set to this linebacker trio in Penn State's 26 class. A lot of these guys can do different things. It mirrors the 25 class in that regard, and that's been done intentionally. They're really building this linebacker room from the ground up in terms of skill sets. Littlejohn's was coveted. Big reason why Penn State pushed. Big reason why he's in the class right now.
I'll talk about that linebacker class with you in just a moment here, Tyler, but you kind of tossed it out there pretty well. The fact that this was a pretty short timeline from point A to point B, and point A being the Penn State putting out a scholarship offer in mid-April. It's essentially a 2-month process from when he picks up an offer to when he commits to Penn State. Along the way, he makes that official visit. Plenty of other schools are involved in that process. And from what you've gathered, what was Penn State able to accomplish in a relatively short period of time? And why was Littlejohn comfortable in shutting out the rest of the college football world and making this decision now?
Yeah, it wasn't easy to beat out some schools that were involved a little bit longer. Like Georgia Tech was one of them. Georgia Tech got an official visit from Littlejohn. NC State was involved with Littlejohn for a while. They were actually supposed to get an official visit this upcoming weekend. Obviously, that won't be happening now. I think a lot of it has to do with during the official visit, Littlejohn, the plan was laid out really well for him. He was really receptive to the pitch from the staff, really receptive to what Dan Connor had to say to him throughout the weekend. And again, it wasn't one that we got direct feedback from. Littlejohn's pretty quiet post-official visit, but the fact of the matter is Penn State jumped to that top spot on Littlejohn's list coming out of that visit, and it was going to be difficult for the Nittany Lions to be knocked off from that point on. We saw that come to fruition on Monday night. I just think a lot of this had to do with pitching fit as a linebacker, because again, this is a kid who's played on the edge a lot throughout his prep career. You know, I'm sure there was a point where he was dead set on playing on the edge on the next level. The size just isn't there, but man, elite athleticism. Just the testing, all the testing feedback that I've received is, if you're a Penn State fan, you should be pretty excited about what Littlejohn can potentially bring to this linebacker depth chart. And he was receptive to hearing all of that from Connor. He was very open to Penn State's point of view on his positional focus at the next level. And he felt at home around the staff in State College. That's another important factor of that OV that got this one done.
From a size standpoint, kind of reminded me, and also positional kind of trajectory, reminds me a little bit of Keon Wiley, where he was in Philadelphia a few cycles back. I think he was in the same class as Abdul Carter. Things can go fast. Now he's a redshirt junior trying to work his way back from an injury. But with Wiley, I remember there was a question: is he an edge rusher? Is he a linebacker? Relatively similar size, similar stature, 6'2", 210, sub weight at this stage. And so that just kind of took my mind that way. When you talk about Littlejohn as a prospect in his own right, I know the numbers are beautiful from what he's done in the backfield. 25-plus tackles for loss last year as a junior, 14 sacks, highly effective at getting into the backfield. When you got a chance to watch this film, put together your commit analysis over at lions247.com, what were some things that really popped up for you and maybe lent towards that transition to focus full-time at linebacker?
So the first step that he has coming off the edge translates to the linebacker position. I think that's something that's going to allow him to get downhill pretty quickly, blow plays up in the backfield. That's what he was really good at as a junior, albeit doing it in a different capacity. But he had upwards of 20 TFLs as a junior. The sack numbers, I believe he had 14. And he did that in just 7 games, 80-plus tackles in total. Only 7 games. Those are some really impressive numbers for me. So I think the overall athletic ability, the ability to make plays sideline to sideline, that quick first step, the overall agility that a Littlejohn has, I would file him away as another prospect where Chuck Losey gets his hands on him, packs on some pounds, and you keep that athleticism intact. You're looking at a potentially really good linebacker at the next level. So the first step is what pops on film for me, because if he can shoot those gaps and get downhill and just consistently impact the ground game in the opposing backfield, he's going to be a force.
We will learn a lot more about this young man in the weeks and months ahead. Relatively new on the target board, as we've discussed, and so someone that we're still getting to know a lot more about the nuances of his game and the relationships that he carries with Penn State. But Littlejohn is commitment number 20 for Penn State in a class that now ranks 7th nationally. And when it comes to linebacker, Tyler, this was a class that got through April, and we didn't really know what it was going to look like. And now here we are 6 weeks later, and there are 3 commitments on board at this position now. You got Matthew Lama, who we had a chance to see at Penn State's practice field doing some camp work last week. And then, of course, Littlejohn now on board. And then Terry Wiggins, who I know if folks heard Brian Doan discussing Wiggins a few weeks ago on this podcast, he thinks he can be an absolute star at the next level. So 3 guys there for Dan Connor to work with. And when it comes to this size of this class, do we expect more additions? And what do you make of the trio that's currently occupying things?
Again, I think the trio just complements itself so well. I think Terry Wiggins can be defined as a chess piece, a guy who could be used in a multitude of ways, and that's exactly how Jim Knowles is going to use him. Matthew Lama, he's that Mike Thumper kind of kid in the middle, but again, he's not your typical one with his athletic ability, with his combination of size and speed. So there's a lot of intrigue there. And then Littlejohn, everything we just laid out. It's just, for me, it's so similar to the trio of LeVar Arrington second, Cam Smith, and Alex Tesh in the 25 class. Arrington kind of being that guy you can plug in a couple different places. Tash being the guy to play in the middle. And Smith, he's versatile. He can use athleticism to play in a couple different spots, make plays sideline to sideline, drop into coverage for you. So, again, this is done intentionally as well. These are coveted skill sets for Dan Connor. It's what he wants out of his linebackers. And back-to-back cycles, he's been able to get that. And I think rebuild the linebacker, maybe rebuild's not the right word because there's already quality pieces in place there, guys like Anthony Speck, Kari Jackson, quality young guys in place, but just stack more quality depth than there previously was. Now, when it comes to the rest of linebacker recruiting this cycle, it's a good chance Penn State's done. I think Kosiak Paulo would have a spot if he wanted one, but if he lands anywhere other than Texas, for me at this point, it would be an upset. Rodney Colton, Penn State's kind of taking that one in a different direction. He's staying down south anyway. Ellis Alloway from Florida, that was an interesting one. I actually talked to him on Monday. I want to see if that official visit that was supposed to be for this upcoming weekend was still on. And at that point it was, but that was about, I'd say, an hour before news of Littlejohn getting in hit our phones. So I'm not sure that one's going to take place right now. But if this is the trio that signs with Penn State during the early signing period and that's it, will not surprise me in the slightest. Penn State likes what it has there.
I think you're right. Rebuilding the room is probably too strong of a word, but you go back to the 2022 class. I mentioned Keon Wiley. He's still here, but we're still trying to figure out who he is as a linebacker. Can he be healthy throughout a regular season? Can he contribute to you consistently? And then the other linebacker in that 2022 class is the top edge rusher off the NFL draft board this spring in Abdul Carter. You followed that up with a three-man 2023 class that featured Tamia Robinson, who's going to be spending this season at USC. Kavion Keys, a former blue chip who ran into some issues off the field, was no longer with the program as of last August. And so Tony Rojas and Keon Wiley are your only two holdovers from those two linebacker classes. You do add Amari Campbell from North Carolina as a transfer with starting experience from the Tar Heels. He helps you fill that gap a little bit. But we got a lot to learn about. Last year's two-man class, Anthony Specca didn't burn redshirt. Kari Jackson was sidelined throughout the season. You've already referenced the three guys who are here on campus. Cam Smith hasn't taken a practice yet at the college level, and then three guys coming up next. And so I think that, to your point, there does need to be some kind of cracks filled in within this room if you don't want to run into issues down the road. And Amari Campbell helps you with that as a supplemental transfer piece. But I think you're right. The 2024 class – the 2025 class that we're going to get a longer look at this year, and then this 2026 class that Littlejohn joins can kind of get you back on track from a personnel numbers perspective and body type perspective in this linebacker room after losing a few guys that you probably weren't expecting to lose. Tyler, when we look at this class now, 20 guys are on board. You've mentioned a few times this is a class that could push toward 30 when it's all said and done. So feels like it's getting late, but maybe it's not as late as it might seem considering the numbers that can still go into this Nittany Lions group between now and that December signing period. And a bunch of those key names to know were on campus this past weekend for another official visit opportunity. Let's start with the five-star offensive lineman who's been a topic of conversation here for at least the last year on the podcast, Emmanuel Ihenacho out of the DMV area. Penn State got its latest swing, highly contentious recruitment for one of the country's premier offensive line recruits.
Penn State's in better standing now here than it was before the official visit. What did we say going into that trip? If the Nittany Lions were going to be able to make a move, they would have to hammer home stuff like proximity to home, education, just being able for the family to see Ihenacho play easier. And all of that was hit during the official visit. And all of that seemed to go over really, really well. Now, where does that leave Penn State? Because Ihenacho's making it out to Oregon this weekend. The Ducks have long been considered the favorite here. He's still tentatively, deciding August 5th. Development's a big part of it for Ihenacho as well, and he outlined that Penn State has that working in its favor. But again, it's tough to come around. I think it's still going to be a difficult pull for Penn State in the end. Oregon is looming as a big-time factor in this recruitment. We just got to call it what it is. But Penn State liked what it accomplished with Ihenacho. It's definitely in a better place now. I think it's in a more realistic place now because, again, you got the family to the campus for the first time for the official visit. A lot of questions were answered in a positive manner, and Ihenacho really, really enjoyed the trip. He enjoyed his time at Penn State, spending around the staff, getting back with a lot of familiar faces, guys he's gotten to know pretty well throughout the course of his recruitment. So Penn State's better off. Does that mean they get this one done in the end? Not necessarily.
What do you think it would take for Penn State to overcome the field here? And certainly Oregon, he's got to visit out there. We don't know that Ihenacho gets back to campus between now and when he decides. So in these communicative efforts and trying to lay out the blueprint for what his college career could look like in Happy Valley, where do the Nittany Lions lean to try to gain an edge with limited time now remaining?
I'm not sure said he's going to be back for the whiteout, so take that for what you will. At this point,
he will be. He's saying he will be here for the Oregon game in late September when he is committed to potentially Oregon.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Okay. If he sticks to that August 5th date, yeah, who knows? I mean, this recruitment has just taken so many twists and turns. We'll see what comes down the pipeline here pretty soon. But what would it take for Penn State to overcome the field? I mean, they got to be competitive in the NIL space, which they have been throughout. But again, Oregon, we've seen that. They've operated on a different level in certain recruitments in the NIL field. I think that could be a factor here. They just got to continue hammering home relationships, proximity to home, education, development. They just kind of have to keep doing what they've been doing and chipping away and hoping that it goes in their favor. Again, and that's why I think it's tough for me to come around on, oh, yeah, Penn State did really well this weekend. But, yeah, they're really, really, right in the thick of getting this one done. I think they are in the thick. But, again, Oregon's just going to be tough to overcome.
Let's talk about a couple other offensive linemen. Iheanacho, of course, the headliner. He's a top 25 prospect nationally, but a couple guys who certainly warrant attention in their own right. Drew Evers made the trip up last weekend from Flower Mound High School in Texas, a top 30 interior offensive line prospect out of the Lone Star State. And then Charlie Thom. Charlie Thom is a guy that we got to look at about 10 days ago or so at Penn State's first big man challenge of the summer. By the end of that afternoon, he was in possession of a Penn State scholarship offer. And a week later, he was back in town for his official visit. So things moving fast for Thom. Talk us through both Evers and Thom and where Penn State stands with both coming out of this weekend.
You could make the case that Penn State made the biggest move with Evers this weekend. He got to campus, and he's got a lot to think about now. This is another one where I'm having a tough time coming all the way around. I still think Ohio State's going to be difficult to beat, but Penn State undoubtedly left a really, really strong impression on Drew Evers. And you got to remember, this is not foreign to the Evers family. Penn State was after the older brother, Nick Evers, as a quarterback in the 22 class for a long time. And then Drew Aller signs with the Nittany Lions. Evers winds up at Oklahoma. That goes in a completely different direction. But the Evers family didn't forget what James Franklin and his staff are all about. Those relationships were picked right back up over the weekend. And for Drew, I think the biggest thing was the family being sold on Penn State being a spot for him. That seemed to go over pretty well. He's going to go to Texas A&M this weekend. Again, the Buckeyes have done really, really well here for an extended period of time. I think they're going to be tough to beat. But this is a situation now where Penn State has clearly made a move up the list for Evers, and they're going to be right in that conversation when it comes time for him to pop.
We'll go with Thom here because I know you pointed toward Evers here. Is this a situation where with Thom, there's other programs now making their moves? Because it felt like for a while there, Penn State might be taking over the driver's seat if it wanted to. What do we need to know about kind of the remainder of Thom's recruitment? Because he's a guy who is converting from tight end. He reclassified. He's up in New England. And so there's some dynamics in play with him. But clearly Phil Troutwine and James Franklin saw what they wanted to see when he was at team facilities about a week and a half ago to put that offer on the table.
Yeah, Notre Dame offered Thom on Tuesday morning. And I think once that Notre Dame offer came in, it was pretty telling. That was a recruitment where, Penn State was in a good spot heading into the OV, and it wouldn't have surprised us if Thom committed necessarily. Penn State also didn't go for that hard sell. They went with their usual self. You got to make sure this is where you really want to be before you commit in our favor. Thom gets that Notre Dame offer on Tuesday morning, and I think that's going to be a telling one in his recruitment. Would not surprise me if he lands in South Bend, has some family ties to the school. His mother attended Notre Dame. So that was an offer he really, really wanted. So he didn't just, commit. It was a good official visit. I got the chance to talk to Thom myself, but it was a good official visit. He likes Penn State a lot, but Notre Dame, it just has the sense of a school where he wants to be. Would not surprise me to see the Fighting Irish get that one done in their favor. And, Thom, he didn't just commit and secure a spot in the class. You kind of got to give him credit because some kids do that, and then a week later they're gone when they get the offer they really want. That was not the situation here. And, life goes on the offensive tackle board. We'll see. Thom's not committed to Notre Dame yet, so anything can happen. But you read the tea leaves, I think it's pretty clear where that one's heading.
Okay, well, we'll keep track on that one. Another reminder that recruiting this time of year, it's a day by day by day kind of conversation with these guys, a lot of them. Let's go over to the other side of the trenches, some defensive linemen who are on campus for their official visits. T-Ron Richardson made the trip up from Hopewell, Virginia. And then another New England lineman from Tabor Academy. We're going to talk about Tabor Academy's quarterback a little bit later on the show, but defensive lineman Carter Gooden, considered a top 100 overall prospect in the 2026 class, also in town. And so Deion Barnes, he's been getting face-to-face with a lot of defensive line targets throughout this official visit window that continued throughout this past weekend. And where do things stand?
So it's another busy weekend. I think it's another weekend where we got a little bit of clarity on some guys who might be not necessarily second tier on the board, but not in that top realm of guys like, Luke Wafel and Carter Meadows on the edge, or Damari Simeon or Keyshawn Stansel on the interior. That being said, Penn State really, really likes both of the defensive linemen that were on campus this weekend. Starting with Gooden, again, that was a recruitment that looked like it was going to be more geared towards the interior from Penn State's standing. It's more on the edge now. So it was an informative weekend in the sense that Gooden had to dig in and learn more about where exactly the Nittany Lions would see him playing on the edge. Went over well. Penn State's right in that recruitment. He's going to see North Carolina this week during the week. Going to go to Boston College for an official to close things out. I've heard BC's in good shape. I've heard UCLA's in good shape. I've heard Penn State's in good shape. So that one still seems pretty open. Don't have a concrete timeline for a decision there. Teron Richardson, he's a little bit closer to a decision. He's down to a top 5. It's not a decision that he's planning on going public with until August, which, again, if you're Penn State, you still got Simeon out there for the taking. You still got Stansel out there for the taking. So that's not really the end of the world in terms of timing. But Penn State has 2 on the interior committed. Isaac Trikwara, Alex Haskell. Deion Barnes wants to add another body. We've mentioned Garrett Witherington as a potential fit in that regard. I think Teron Richardson's an even better fit. I really like the prospect profile on him. I think he's a riser in this class for a reason. Really, really good player out of Virginia. Had a good OV over the weekend. Can see himself at Penn State. Still see schools like South Carolina, Virginia Tech, Florida, Oklahoma also in the mix as well. So this one still seems pretty open until the OVs are complete. But Penn State helped itself with Teron Richardson over the weekend.
All right, we just took a bunch of linemen in the spotlight here to begin the official visit conversation. Let's finish it with a couple of skill players on offense and begin at tight end, where Penn State's still looking for a commitment in the 2026 cycle. It's not a position that we've been worried much about in recent years because they end up with the blue chip or multiple blue chips, it seems, on a year-by-year basis. And Braden Fogel was in town at Lexington High School in Ohio. He's a top 200 overall recruit, a top 10 tight end nationally. And if I recall correctly, this was supposed to be a multi-tight end weekend for Penn State, getting a look at a couple guys, but ended up being a one-man show. So talk us through why that was the case and ultimately where Fogel is on this target board.
It was the case because Luke Sorensen from California is probably going to Nebraska. He announces this week crystal ball's all in favor of the Huskers. He didn't even wind up making it to Penn State, which, I mean, look, the Nittany Lions were his leader at one point, but he got to Nebraska and they made a really, really strong impression on him. So that visit went off the schedule. That left Ty Howell the focus solely on Fogel. And I think Penn State definitely made a move. I'm not, again, another situation. It's the theme of the weekend. Not sure if they're going to be able to overcome a Georgia or an LSU for Fogel, but the pitch was a simple one. Fogel, he's got that elite basketball athletic background. I mean, he had legit D1 offers to play basketball. He had an offer from Arizona State, so it was high major offers as well. Use that athleticism, come to Penn State and be the next great pass catching tight end for the Nittany Lions. Hal has had developmental success with guys built like that in recent memory. Guys like Theo Johnson who were just uberly athletic. Now they're different, obviously, but Fogel carries that same elite level athleticism. So that was a big part of the pitch, and it went over well. But when it comes to tight end, it's a cycle where you could do without one. You're still looking to add one. You could do without one if push came to shove. I'm looking more at this weekend. Pierce Peterson, 4-star from Minnesota, is going to be on campus. That's a big official visit. That's one Penn State could really get done. I think that one might be a tad more realistic than Fogel right now, but Penn State, kind of like Evers, where they've inserted themselves more into the conversation. I think that's the best way to put it.
Peterson, if I recall correctly, we got eyes on him at a spring practice at some point. This spring he made the trip down to State College. All right, we'll keep tabs on tight end, an unfinished situation there in the 2026 cycle. And same goes for running back, Messiah Minkins. We've spoken to him a couple different times recently at lions247.com. Hopefully you followed our coverage of that, but very much feeling comfortable with his commitment as a top 24/7 running back in this class. He's got to campus a couple times this month. Got to work with his future running backs coach in Stan Drayton, played some 7-on-7 ball with his teammates out of Harrisburg. but they may not be done. They may want to get a partner in that class with Messiah Minkins, who told us he's not shying away from competition, whether it's within his own recruiting class or when he gets to campus. So Brian Bonner has been a name that you and I have bounced around quite a bit for that potential second running back slot. He's out of Valencia, California. He's just on the edge of top 100 overall prospect designation at 247 Sports. So a premier player at this position. What was the selling point on campus at Penn State for a guy who is on the opposite end of the country? And so it's got to be a pretty big swing if you want to keep his attention toward you.
The relationship with Stan Drayton was a big selling point. The utilization in Penn State's backfield was a big selling point. Penn State laid out how it could play to Bonner's strengths. That was a big part of the visit that went over well. And he's not being deterred by distance in this, or he'll go anywhere. So, and that really opens the door for Penn State to get this one done. UCLA's been in really strong. UCLA was Bonner's leader going into June. I'm not sure that's as crystal clear at this point. Washington was heavily in this mix at one point. As I mentioned, they've kind of tailed off a little bit. And Nebraska got Bonner for a good official visit just before Penn State. He doesn't have anything slated this weekend. We'll see if that changes. He was originally heading to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame kind of filled up at running back, and Bonner was starting to look elsewhere himself anyway. So that visit's not going to take place as originally planned. And I think Penn State – I know Penn State likes what it accomplished with Bonner over the weekend. I think you could kind of reflect on this visit as one where the Nittany Lions get this one done. This was the moment that it got over the line just because the relationship with Stan Drayton is in such a good place now. Again, Bonner has such a better idea of how exactly he would be utilizing Andy Kotelnicki's offense.
It'd be a hell of a tandem if they can make that happen.
Oh, yeah. He's very good, man.
It's very strange to say that it's a Big Ten battle when you're talking about UCLA and Washington and Nebraska, but that's the cluster that we've been discussing here with Bonner. Penn State, all indications are they would like to add a second running back to this class. It's pretty much been their standard operating procedure, cycle by cycle, is adding multiple running backs. They've got a couple freshmen here to work with here in Tyke Hayes and Jabri Wallace-Coleman for the 2025 class. We'll see what shakes out in the 2026 cycle. Tyler, I do want to note that we spoke about a kicker target last time you were on the podcast. I think Penn State put an offer out at that position following a camp. That young man has come off the board very quickly to the Georgia Bulldogs on a commitment. And so with that in mind, are there some Penn State targets that we need to be aware of, some new nuggets based on visits they've made, decisions they've made? Because as I said, it's changing day by day in terms of what the target board looks like.
Not right now. I think it's kind of a lot of the same things that we've said. A lot of these guys, they still have OVs to make. There's still decisions to be made about, commitment dates and sitting down with the family and dissecting, what's going to be the school of choice. I think we're getting into it really right now. I think now that OVs are coming to an end, we're starting to get to a point where, look at a guy like Joey O'Brien, who's going to announce later this week. He's done with official visits, so he's going into decision mode. Corey Adams, he has his final OV this weekend at Oregon. He's going to be going into decision mode shortly after that. So, guys, a lot of guys are nearing the end. I think a lot of them want to get through the entirety of official visit season before reaching that point. Sometimes it doesn't always go accordingly to plan. Sometimes the script changes and guys pop earlier. But this cycle, a lot of top targets have stayed true to their original plan. And that makes the next 2-3 weeks, maybe even the next month, really, really busy on the commitment front. So, nothing necessarily groundbreaking to share right now in terms of new developments on where a top target might be leaning, just because OVs aren't done, and those who are, they're in decision mode, and they're playing that really close to the vest.
A month from now, you're going to have a lot more guys on board for this Penn State class, we think. You're going to have Penn State's coaches really starting to turn their attention toward preseason camp in a significant way, 2 weeks away from getting back on the field in pads. You're going to have those prospects starting to turn their attention toward their senior seasons that are upcoming and their upcoming preseason camps. And, of course, along the way, you're going to have all sorts of NIL mechanisms going and different pushes and all these different things going on in the college football world. Just because the season rolls around, which it will, and there's a dead period in July now, doesn't mean that things are going to be all that quiet on the recruiting trail. But we do expect the next month to maybe resolve some of these open questions and maybe set the stage for a few more in a matter of months remaining before the early signing period. Tyler, you and I were back on Penn State's outdoor practice field and inside Haluba Hall for a bit last Friday. We got a chance to get eyes on a bunch of Penn State recruits, including some commits. And That included a quarterback, Peyton Falzone, for the second time in 5 days. He was at team facilities working with Danny O'Brien, Penn State's quarterback's coach. This was more of an intimate setting. When we saw him the Sunday prior at the Elite Showcase camp, I should say, he was one of probably 25, 30, maybe more than that, quarterbacks who are getting reps once every 30 reps, essentially, because they were all standing in drill lines. This time, he was one of only 3 quarterbacks. And so it was a lot of direct engagement with Danny O'Brien, and it allowed us to get a longer look at Peyton Falzone. I don't think we learned a ton new about Mr. Falzone during that look, Tyler Calvaruso. I know you weren't at that camp a week ago, but you did see him with us at the Elite 11 camp here in State College in May. And it's a work in progress. We had Brad Mendler on last week on our last episode of this podcast that dropped Friday. He's the personal quarterback trainer for Drew Aller, for backup quarterback Ethan Grunkemeyer, and for Peyton Falzone. And he said it can take some time. It can take a matter of months before Peyton goes from thinking about all of his adjusted arm mechanics to not thinking about them and just being able to go through those processes naturally. I think he's still going through it a little bit and has a lot on his mind, Tyler. But this time spent with Danny O'Brien and him making the hustle, not just to go out to Ohio and spend weekends out with Brad Mendler and training out there and then coming out home to Pennsylvania, but spending as much time as possible with Danny O'Brien, letting Danny O'Brien critique what he sees, letting Danny O'Brien send him home with tips. And I think that's all the kind of hustle you want to see from a quarterback who fully acknowledges, as we have, that he's got a ways to go to be a finished product that you feel good about putting out there against the Big Ten defense and playing everything you have to do at the quarterback position.
Yeah, any time spent around Danny O'Brien, any time spent working with Danny O'Brien is definitely valuable for Peyton Falzone, because we're not that much further away from O'Brien being the head of his development. He's going to be in State College on a full-time basis. O'Brien's going to be the guy that he's working with every single day. Trace McSorley, too. Those two got the chance to catch up during Falzone's most recent visit. And look, I don't have any, massive new takeaways from the performance. Again, it kind of is what it is, right? He's still coming into his own as a quarterback. The arm strength is apparent. The athletic ability and overall upside is apparent. He still has some things to fine-tune and work on mechanically, but again, that's nothing new. That's what we know Peyton Falzone to be at this point. I think he's heading in the right direction, but again, he's still got to get there.
We saw some really interesting reactionary drills, some pocket pressure drills as well, movement drills, and we have about 3 minutes of highlight videos of Peyton Falzone working closely with Danny O'Brien up at Lions247.com. So check that out, kind of your latest progress report on where Falzone is ahead of his senior season. And 3 times for us to get a chance to watch him pass the ball a little bit in the last month. You can still tell he's got a ways to go, but he's putting in that effort. And really curious, because I think regardless of whether he's where he wants to be as a passer or not, he's going to have a pretty dominant senior season if he stays healthy with those legs, with that strong arm, and within that offensive attack that he's already very comfortable with at Nazareth. When we look at the other 2 young quarterbacks that were with him, I thought we saw some really good things from Trayvon Towns, who's a 2028 California quarterback. Penn State offered him back in April. He's got a bunch of power conference offers. I think we kind of recognized why while watching him work with Danny O'Brien, and O'Brien was pretty reactive at times in terms of praising some of his passes and calling some of them dimes. And then the other guy that we got filing away long-term here, 2029 quarterback CJ Cipher, made the trip up from Georgia to work with Danny O'Brien. He's got a couple SEC offers already, Arkansas and Auburn. This is a kid that hasn't played high school ball yet, as far as I understand it. So CJ Cipher and Trayvon Towns, 2 players that we'll keep tabs on there. What do you think of those younger passers? And it's really a good thing for us to see only 3 quarterbacks working with Danny O'Brien, because it tells you 2 things. One, Danny O'Brien cares about those 3 guys and wants a longer look at them. And number 2, it lets us just kind of sit back and take it in a little bit instead of having to find them in a crowd of 40 quarterbacks like we often have to in a camp setting.
Yeah, Towns look pretty fluid. Really advanced, I think, for a 28 kid. He spent a couple days in State College. I caught up with him, and I'll have a write-up on that at some point once we sort through all the craziness of this recruiting calendar. But really, really fluid. I think fundamentally, physically as well. I think you could see why he's amassed so many early offers and why he's thought of as one of the better quarterbacks overall in that 28 class. There's no ranking yet on our end, but when it does come, I anticipate Towns will be up there. CJ Cypher, I'd be surprised if he's not big time when it's all said and done. When you're thought of as next up in place of Julian Lewis at Carrollton High down in Georgia, you got to have something going for you. You got to have something going for you to earn those early SEC offers as well. So Cypher looks the part already. Yeah, I think he's only going to keep getting better.
I'm glad you brought up Julian Lewis from Carrollton High School in Georgia. He was a top-tier quarterback, ended up signing with Colorado, and he's a freshman there this year. But, yeah, big shoes to fill, and this is kind of that next man up there. So 3 quarterbacks, and we'll have highlights of Towns up with Tyler's story on his experience here in Happy Valley. We'll see if he is really a name to know long-term for Penn State's quarterback board. But we know that there's a couple wide receivers we liked a lot, seeing them out there for this mini camp that Penn State put on Friday morning. Along with the quarterbacks, we saw Jasir Rogers, who we're not going to go through it again here on the podcast because we've been talking about him a bunch, hammering home that we think he deserves a rise in rankings and all that stuff. He was fantastic at Penn State's Elite Showcase Camp a couple Sundays ago. But there was another wide receiver on those practice fields for Penn State that certainly got our attention. It's a guy that we weren't necessarily expecting to see when we made our way to campus, and it's a 5-star composite receiver recruit.
Yeah, Dakota Garant from Michigan, who he is a top priority for Marcus Hagan in that 27 class. He made it to town, worked out with Peyton Falzone, worked out with Trey Towns, worked out with CJ Cypher, and he looked a part of a blue chip receiver recruit throughout the day. He was making one-handed catches, breaking off his routes really, really cleanly. Just overall looked the absolute part of an elite wide receiver. It was my first time seeing him in action in person. I've gotten the chance to talk to Dakota a couple times in his recruitment. It's my first time watching him run, and again, that ranking, it speaks for itself, right? He's a 5-star in the composite. Would not be surprised if he ends as a 5-star on our end. His recruitment, still early to call. Michigan's in really strong. Ohio State's in really strong. Penn State's in really strong. But I loved what I saw. One of the more impressive receivers I've seen this summer and on the camp circuit, I can tell you that.
We actually have multiple notebooks up from our latest look at Penn State camp action, one from this mini camp that we covered, and Tyler had a bunch of good notes up on Friday, and then the other kind of all-encompassing from the Big Man Challenge, from the 7-on-7 tournament that we witnessed. Middletown High School out of Delaware was the 7-on-7 champions on Friday afternoon. There'll be another 7-on-7 tournament this upcoming week. We saw a couple Penn State commits out there. David Davis, a cornerback commit out of Pittsburgh, doing big things on both sides of the ball for Amani Christian. We saw Messiah Mickens make some big catches down the field. He's a running back, but he's certainly a versatile playmaker on the football field. But back over at the Big Man Challenge for the second consecutive week, it was Kevin Brown stealing the show, Tyler. Top 100 recruit. Didn't get to play much as a junior because of a foot injury, but he is fully healthy, and he is fully putting it on display for anyone who wants to watch these Fridays on Penn State's fields that he is an elite level talent. And you can pick up on this because you got other people's parents, you've got other prospects camping alongside him who just kind of keep staring at him a little bit after each of these drills, whether they're wondering who the hell this kid is or they know who he is. He is a spotlight aura about him, and it's not something that he develops himself. It's just because he goes out and dominates. He was an MVP for the second straight week at the Big Man Challenge, and his Harrisburg High School squad was the Big Man Challenge overall winner. And so I don't know what more we can kind of pile on to what we said about Kevin Brown last week, Tyler, but just reinforcing that this guy is at a different level than essentially any of his peers.
Yeah, there were some pretty solid linemen there, but Kevin Brown was just in a different league. I mean, I wrote it in our notebook, like him being the best player there, that's what we come to expect at this point. Every camp that he goes to, every Big Man Challenge that he participates in, he's just the best one out there. That is kind of the player he is, kind of prospect that he is heading into his senior season. I'm excited to get out to Harrisburg at some point during the fall and see him back with the pads on, because I got a good look at him during the playoffs last year, his first game back, and he's driving kids 20 yards back into the turf. So I want to see what 100% Kevin Brown can really do, going both ways for Harrisburg as well. I mean, he was really limited on defense because they want to keep him healthy on offense for the playoff run. So during the fall, I'm looking forward to watch him, Messiah Mickens. It's going to be fun to watch those two go at it.
Just like we had video of Peyton Falzone and his day on the Penn State camp field, we had the same for Kevin Brown. Video highlights of him dominating the Big Man Challenge, doing some things that just other guys out there weren't capable of doing, simply put. Another lineman out there who had our attention and certainly had Kevin Brown's attention. Kevin kind of had his arm around this kid. He was chewing his ear off a little bit. He's a 2027 prospect out of Illinois, but like Brown, he's inside the top 24/7 rankings, a player who has a bunch of power conference offers, and certainly from a physical standpoint stood out to us, 6'7" frame or so. Cameron Wagner out of Illinois. And what do we need to know about this young fellow? Because he's the last guy I wanted to bring up from what we witnessed on the fields.
Yeah, got into town Thursday night, went to dinner with Phil Trotwell, and he likes him a lot. He could see himself playing for this Penn State staff. Notre Dame's in really good with Wagner now that it's offered. I think the Fighting Irish have a really good chance and a really big say in where that one goes when it's all said and done. But Penn State helped itself with Wagner. I know he really enjoyed working with Trotwell. We have a write-up on the site. He really enjoyed working with the staff. He could see himself growing under Trotwell and the rest of the staff's watch. So want to keep an eye on one of many high-level tackle boards on the target for Penn State in the 27 class. A lot of them within the normal recruiting footprint, a lot of them within Pennsylvania at that. Wagner's from the Midwest, and he's right up there in the pecking order as well.
Let's finish our conversation here, Tyler, with some more quarterbacks and a couple that are on the target board for Penn State in the 2027 cycle, one of which is new to that target board. Let's begin there. Keegan Croucher out of Cheshire Academy up in Connecticut, recently offered by Penn State. Bring us up to speed on why this offer went out and what it might mean moving forward.
I'd say right now with that offer out, you have a pretty clear, maybe not necessarily pretty clear, but you have a good idea of the quarterback pecking order in the 27 class. Peter Bork, Keegan Croucher, they're leading the way now that Croucher has his offer. It was a process for him. You know, he's thrown for the staff a bunch of times. He's camped around. He's camped at Penn State a couple different times. He's thrown for Danny O'Brien. I think he told me it was the third time he'd thrown for O'Brien, and the most recent of which before the weekend was where was it? Just before Under Armour, New Jersey, O'Brien got the chance to watch him throw, and Penn State worked hard to get him back to campus, did so. It's a big offer in his recruitment. I think he's going to give the Nittany Lions a really, really long look. Really talented quarterback. Really impressive arm talent. I've seen him a bunch throughout his prep career. I'm never not impressed with Keegan Croucher. I think he has the chance to be a high-level Power 4 quarterback, and he's right up there on that board right now. And now that he's got that offer, expect him back at Penn State for another visit sooner rather than later.
Croucher's a guy that's played a bunch of football at the high school level. He came in, was an early starter, posted big numbers, and has continued to do that over the course of his career up there at Cheshire Academy. Additionally, about 15 offers to his credit. He's number 12 overall at quarterback per 24/7 Sports. A guy who also can throw the baseball more than 90 miles per hour as well. Big time thrower. Additionally, you mentioned him there, Peter Bork. He has been kind of the name to know, and Croucher now joins him there in the 2027 cycle at quarterback. Like Croucher, he's out of New England. He's at Tabor Academy in Massachusetts. We just spoke about that school a bit because Carter Gooden, a top 100 defensive lineman, out of that same program. But when it comes to Bork, he keeps coming back to Penn State. I think it's only been a few weeks since you brought up a kind of crystal ball rumblings about him ending up here long term. And so what's the latest on Bork and the Nittany Lions?
He's going to be back on campus Wednesday. Pretty excited to work with Danny O'Brien and the staff in a camp setting. That was something those two did together last summer during one of the whiteout camps, and went over really, really well. I think that's kind of when things start to take off here. Obviously, Bork got his offer last summer in that same weekend, but I think working with Danny O'Brien really opened Bork's eyes to what Penn State could be like for him, and he loves the staff. He sees a pretty clear fit in Penn State's offense, given his strengths as a quarterback. So, yeah, this is one where he's been to Penn State more than any other program in his recruitment. It wouldn't surprise me if he's Penn State's 27 quarterback when it's all said and done. You know, the crystal ball pick from the 24/7 staff is in. It's got a middling confidence meter of 5 because he's still got a ways to go in his recruitment. Some 27 quarterbacks go earlier. I mean, that's just the nature of the position. Borg still seems pretty open. A lot of that has to do with the fact that he wasn't all that active during the spring because he was busy playing lacrosse. And it's different at Tabor when you play a lot of your football games on Saturdays and you're just not able to make as many visits as some other quarterbacks in your class. So Borg's process is a little bit different. What's not different is, Penn State standing. They've been high on the list from the start. Nothing has changed.
And both these guys, pretty towering presences in the pocket, both over 6'3", halfway through their high school career. lean, tall quarterback types right here in Bork and Croucher. Let me ask you now. I mean, it's June 17th as we record. These guys will be playing their junior seasons of football in about two and a half months up there in New England. What's your gut tell you? Does Penn State have a quarterback committed to the 2027 class by the time these guys are showing up to play more football on the field this fall?
Yeah, I think, there are some guys, too, they still want to see out there. There's still some guys they want to see throw. Peyton Houston from Louisiana is one that they're going to have a really close eye on. He's a top 24/7 quarterback as well. He has an offer, but again, you want to see more. So I think as guys like Bork, Croucher, Houston, other quarterbacks in the 27 class, we're not even talking about right now, continue to throw. And that goes beyond the quarterback board as well. That's really every position. A lot of these junior seasons are going to be paramount in the evaluation process. We know how it goes. Some guys who are really, really high on the board right now, they might not be when we're having this conversation next spring, next summer. That's some guys fall off, others rise to the top. And I think just this fall, as is the case every single fall, are going to be crucial in evaluating the underclass ranks.
Penn State had Troy Hune committed last summer before his junior season out in San Diego. What is the advantage if Penn State were to find its quarterback commitment early-ish, let's say this summer, and get the ball rolling with that guy as a peer recruiter and get the ball rolling as here's the quarterback in our class? Obviously, you could add a second quarterback. We've seen them do that in the 2026 cycle and bringing Peyton Falzone on to partner with Troy Hune. But what is the motivation beyond just saying, hey, we found our quarterback? What is the motivation for class building efforts to fill that specific slot earlier in the process rather than waiting and doing it later?
Yeah, it really gives you just the pillar of your recruiting class early, and that allows you to kind of maybe not necessarily focus your attention more elsewhere, but dictate the way things go because you know the kind of receiver that quarterback will want. You know who that quarterback knows and who he can peer recruit. I think it just helps everything's come together really, really nicely. And, of course, you have the leadership aspect of it. Quarterbacks are natural-born leaders. That's just what you got to be to play the position. You look at guys like Peter Bork and Keegan Croucher in specific, because we're talking about this 27 board, those guys carry that trait. So, if they were to hop in, Penn State would have itself a very clear leader. In a 27 class is already off. I mean, it's an incredible start. You got Kimon Spell, who's a 5-star running back. You got a pair of top 100 prospects in Seton LaSalle receiver Khalil Taylor and Leighton Von Brand, who we've talked about plenty on the offensive line. So you had a high-level quarterback like Bork or Crouch or really any player of any ilk to a class this early. It just takes that group to the next level and allows you to continue build in the right direction without having to worry about adding a quarterback further on down the line. We've seen classes where Penn State has had to do that. Ethan Grunkemeyer came along a little bit later in his class. Jackson Smollett came on much later in his class after the whole Marcus Stokes ordeal where he flipped to Florida. So, it alleviates a little bit of stress maybe if you're the staff because you're not scrambling to find your quarterback late. And it definitely just helps the overall standing and outlook of your class, not just internally, but externally to other recruits and top targets as well.
You mentioned that we're going to get another look at Bork throwing the ball around Wednesday at camp. We will be back on the practice fields of Penn State on Wednesday afternoon, get a whole lay of the land, whatever we're seeing out there from a prospect standpoint, and maybe guys who are building up their stock to get an offer, to be a committable offer. We'll give you all the feedback over at lions247.com throughout the afternoon with our live updates thread. And that's kind of going to set the stage for a big week ahead, Tyler. We've got another 7-on-7 tournament, Big Man Challenge on Friday. This weekend will feature the Lash Bash event, which is always a must-know item on Penn State's recruiting calendar. And so without diving into a full preview of the weekend, because we can probably do that with our second episode this week, what is kind of the stage being set for Lions 24/7 recruiting coverage in the next 4 or 5 days?
It's going to be jam-packed, man. I mean, again, OV feedback. You got Lash Bash visitors locking in their plans, letting us know they're going to be in town. You got the Whiteout camp as well next weekend. So really, we're just every single thing that we hit consistently throughout June and throughout official visit season with all the OV feedbacks and the interviews and the intel coming out of those, all of our camp coverage. And, now we used to talk about Lash Bash in July. Now July's a dead period. We're talking about it in June. So just tack one little extra thing on to all of that.
Yeah, a ton going on right now behind the scenes. You can catch all of it over at lions247.com as a VIP subscriber. 50% off right now. Great June special going on. Gets you in the door full VIP access at lions247.com. You don't want to miss it. This class is going to keep growing. We're going to have more observations from the camp circuit, and pretty soon we're going to be out there on the practice field watching the actual Penn State football team put in preseason work and giving you a bunch of notes as kickoff nears. So jump on board now. Tyler, we'll get back on the field together Wednesday. I know you got a lot more coming our way at lions247.com, so looking forward to that.
Thanks, man. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.
All righty. That's going to do it for this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. Thanks, as always, to Tyler Calvaruso for giving us the latest and greatest in Penn State recruiting coverage right here. And check him out every single day of the week over at our website. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks, as always, for listening and watching the Lions 24/7 podcast.